I, 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 He got fired from Kane, now we ain't got no shame. So we started a pod, took Yates to job.
Hey everybody, welcome to Chuck Yates Needs a Job, the podcast. Honored today to have as my guest Ann Bradbury. Is it CEO? Is that the title?
That is, yep.
I like that. Chief Executive Officer of AXPC, the American Exploration and Production Council.
You got it.
Now, who are y'all?
So AXPC represents the leading independent producers of oil and gas here domestically. So we have an onshore focus and we have a domestic focus. So if you think about who the big independents are, they're probably my member. So we have about 30-something members, ranging from the largest independents such as Conoco to some of the medium and smaller, yet public independents as well. And we are their advocacy voice in Washington to advocate on behalf of and educate policymakers on issues related to domestic oil and gas production.
I'm going to say something with my outside voice that I probably shouldn't. Educate policymakers?
I know.
That's kind of an oxymoron. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's a tall job. It's a big job.
Somebody's got to do it. So IPAA, are we friend, foe? How does that work?
Very friendly.
Okay. And do y'all have different buckets you focus on, or are you kind of doing the same thing?
Yeah, we have very similar focuses. There is a lot of overlap, and we collaborate a lot with IPAA. Generally speaking, when you look at the membership, mine AXPC skews a little bit larger and more public, and theirs skews a little more to the smaller independents. And because the issues that a ConocoPhillips has is different than an issue that a smaller independent mom and pop has, and so we take different perspectives, but we work very closely together.
So, issue du jour of the day. What's the big thing you guys are focusing on these days?
So we do both legislative work and regulatory work. On the sort of legislative side, the congressional side, there's a lot of talk of permitting reform right now. Which gets super weedy really fast, but it's all of the environmental statutes and permitting requirements that make it really hard to build anything in America these days, whether it's a pipeline or a wind farm. So that's, I would say, the biggest area of focus right now on the Hill. And then on the regulatory side, it's like, oh my God, don't know where to start there. I would say we are focusing most of our efforts on the EPA and the new methane rules coming out, but then there's also the methane tax. We do a lot of federal lands work, so BLM, DOI work. And then because I have mostly public companies, we also are very involved with the SEC and the new climate disclosure rules that they're working on. So it's quite a bit there.
Yeah. I may be wearing my tinfoil hat right now, so pardon me, and it's totally appropriate to roll your eyes or say, yes, you are being a nut job. But do the quote-unquote enemies of oil and gas, is there really a contingent that is fighting this kind of guerrilla warfare through the EPA and various regulatory things that just want to kill the industry? Or is it folks are just uneducated, and so they kind of hear the last thing in there? Is there an element of that in DC?
There's definitely an element of it. Yeah. I mean, it's that's not a tinfoil hat question at all.
I didn't think it was, but yeah.
I mean, you get just like, on our side, the industry and industry supporters aren't necessarily monolithic. The other side isn't monolithic either. So I think you get a mix of people that are just super anti-fossil fuel and want to see the industry go away. You have a mixed in with people that are just really uninformed, but are in positions of power. And then you have people that are well-informed that are actually trying to make good decisions and do it in a constructive way. And so it's you really have a mix of all three.
And the reason I kind of set up that question, because where I was going on the more serious part is, they always talk about how horrific legislative processes are in general. I mean, that's the history of democracy and all. But on a topic that is so incredibly complex And what I don't think people appreciate is when you talk energy, it's really a water balloon, right? If you're going to push here, this side's going to pop out, and there are trade offs that have to be made, and there are dollars involved and all. I mean, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and I do think people, the other side is fortunate because they can kind of reduce their position down to a bumper sticker, right? Which is, something along the lines
Save the
of like,
planet.
save the planet, stop using oil and gas, fossil fuels are bad, right? And the reality is much more complicated than
Can I get
that.
on my soapbox for just a
Please.
second? Oil and gas people, I've said this a million times. When we reduce things down to a bumper sticker and we say things like freeze a Yankee, it doesn't help our cause. Please stop. Okay, go ahead.
Right. No. So one of the things that we've been working really hard on this year is something that we sort of refer to as energy education, which is just let's make sure policymakers understand energy fundamentals, which is, not everyone knows that the US is the biggest producer of oil and gas in the world, right? People don't know that. People don't know that we have reduced emissions more than any country in the world. And the reason we have reduced emissions more than any country in the world is because of our increase in production of natural gas. It wasn't renewables, it was natural gas displacing coal. And so we are really working on the first step in advocacy, again, is that relationship building and that education piece. So that's something we work a lot on. I forgot your question that I was answering.
No, but you're going down the path of it. It's when you have a really complicated legislative problem and the other side gets to play guerrilla warfare against you. How do you navigate it? And I think you're right. Number one is education.
Yeah.
We're going to start and try to get people to at least understand the basics.
Exactly. And that, I think the biggest issue that we run into is policymakers that look at both energy production and emissions as if both sort of stop at the border, right? And neither of that is true. Like these are global commodities and emissions clearly don't stop at the border, right? And so
I hate to be crass, but my line about this on the podcast is always, there's not a peeing and a non-peeing section of the pool, right?
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And so if you just look at it from a US perspective, it's not that big of a deal if you're like, well, we're just going to reduce oil here and we're going to build more, wind farms over here, which first of all, you can't do that either. But it simplifies the issue. But when you look at it from a global perspective, which is, the world benefits from our oil and gas, it's a huge national security advantage for us. And by the way, U.S. emissions are like 13% of global emissions, and that number is falling. And the real problem is China, and
to a lesser degree India, but those are the biggies. Yeah,
those are the biggies. Their emissions are skyrocketing, and if you're not trying to address climate and energy issues while looking at these global problems, then like this is all for naught, right? Like it's just pointless. So we try to just keep.
Can I add one more thing to that?
You may.
Because you were like hitting the nail on the head of what if I could get the world to accept one point, it's that it's global and we can't control those actors.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at their behavior and we have to adjust. If we could add one slight point to that in the messages, and we only have so much money that we can save the planet with.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have unlimited funds. Because that's just got to be brought into consideration. And I'll give my one example, electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay. You go to the Volvo website, they did a detailed study on where's the break even where's the break even between an electric vehicle and an internal combustion engine when it comes to carbon footprint from manufacturing on.
Interesting.
And it's actually it's 150 pages. If you get a chance, it'll put you to sleep on the plane if you need to. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of good stuff in there. And the punchline is the way the world generates electricity today, it's call it 90,000 miles. If you generate electricity like Europe does, which is more renewables based, lower carbon, I think they say it's 60,000 miles or 65,000 miles. At the end of the day, we can debate, is that right, not right, whatever. That's still 5 years of a car.
So you're saying what the Volvo study is showing is that there's no emissions benefit until you've been driving your car for 90,000 miles in the US.
Whole wide world, if you use Europe power production, it's like 65,000 miles, which is 5 years of a car, 4, 5, 6 years of a car. Is it really worth trillions and trillions of dollars to go EVs? And that's what the IRA did. The IRA did not say, we want lower emissions, market, y'all go settle it. They said, we want electric vehicles.
Yes.
And so the small little point, and I'm sorry I'm on my soapbox, but is if we could all say, hey, it's a global problem. We've got to deal with these actors. And oh, by the way, we've only got a fixed amount of money to do it. If we could look at it through that lens, I think if people wanted to be intellectually honest and truly try to solve a problem, if we could all look through it at that lens, let's go fight there and not the way it feels like we fight.
Completely agree. And you're also putting, there's a lot of risk associated with that policy as well. And that is, are we going to be able to, have a sufficient grid to power all of these electric vehicles? Are we going to have the sufficient critical minerals to be able to build all of these vehicles? And do people want them? Because I don't know that they do, not to the level that that the administration is sort of betting on, right? I mean, I think their new tailpipe rule assumes that like 70% of all cars sold in 2030 are electric vehicles. Now, I know that number is increasing, but I don't see a world in which 70% of cars sold are going to be electric vehicles within the next 7 years. Like, that's really aggressive. And, what they're going to do is they're going to make ICE vehicles more expensive. And that's just not good for American consumers.
Yeah. And it also leads to kind of another point of, if we make cars way more expensive, we're basically saying to the rest of the world, we're going to go save the planet and let them eat cake. I mean, if a poor village in Africa has to pay a lot for a car, that's bad.
Right.
I mean, that is the West telling the developing world, hey, we got ours, tough.
Right.
And that's not good for world geopolitical stuff. We have to have a better solution than,
Right. And if you look at, there's a huge emissions reduction opportunity to be had from additional coal to gas switching, both here domestically, but also globally. And that doesn't cost a penny. It actually creates jobs in the US and it makes us more energy secure. So, there are a number of solutions out there that don't cost billions of dollars and that don't take away consumer choice. And I feel like those should be more of a focus of policymakers.
I've said this on the podcast again, so my listeners are going to tune out for the next 2 minutes as I talk, but the Marshall Plan for climate change is actually China, India, no more coal. We will finance your natural gas infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And nobody prints money like the United States. So screw it, guys. We got this. We'll print the money for it. We'll make Europe kick in some. I don't know that we can talk. We can probably talk India into it. I don't know that we can talk China into it just because we're strategic enemies. And do they really want to be dependent on worldwide natural gas? But I would kind of say to China, hey, even in World War II, oil was going everywhere. I mean, everybody was selling oil, even with the Russian-Ukraine war and the embargo, oil's going everywhere. Right. So I don't know that I would be that worried if I was dependent on LNG tankers showing up. But
yeah, and you've probably noticed there've been a couple big deals that China's inked in the last week or two for long-term contracts for LNG. And so, their approach is clearly like, we need coal, but we need all of it, right? And I do think even just marginally shifting them towards more LNG and away from coal would probably outweigh the impact of all of the money we're spending on EVs here in the US.
I agree with that totally. The other thing I would do too, if I was in charge and I was energy czar of the world, and God help us if that actually happened. But I think when you look at the existing technologies today, you look at wind and solar, et cetera, we actually need some leapfrog type technologies. And it's probably going to have to be something in the way of carbon capture
Mm-hmm.
if we really want to do something. I still kind of laugh that we have the arrogance that we're going to be able to control the climate if we just suck some CO2 out. But we'll put that aside for just a second. And so, would 500 billion building charging stations be better than 500 billion at MIT, Harvard, Caltech, Rice? You guys and gals, go figure this thing out, because I do feel like we need something that doesn't exist today if we're really going to deal with this.
Totally agree. And you're not the only person that thinks that, right? I mean, I think that was Bill Gates's conclusion when he did this deep dive into how do we solve the climate issue. We know that there are technologies that are going to be needed to address this that don't exist today, and certainly don't exist at scale. Carbon capture, direct air capture, things of that nature are certainly. I mean, the technology is there. It just deploying them at scale, making them economical, are really the big questions. So, I personally think that is a much smarter way to spend our resources, if, to the extent that we're spending resources to address the climate issue, than to sort of direct people into a particular energy source that they don't necessarily want to be directed into at enormous cost to American taxpayers.
One of the things we did is, so I'm dating a British lady. She's lived here for many years, but at the end of the day, she is British. And we'll get on the podcast and I'll talk about Europe. And I get read the riot act at home. Europe is 25 different countries. It is not a uniblock. Well, so what we started doing on Big Digital Energy, the other podcast I do around here, is we will deep dive one European country each week and talk about their energy usage. And one of the fascinating things that's come out of this that I didn't appreciate is France went all in nuclear in the 70s, right? So I think 80% of their energy usage is nuclear. That is Europe's battery, because they are exporting power to everyone else. And so the reason that Europe, and we'll see if they actually have gotten away with it, but to some degree have gotten away to this point with all the renewables they have, is they have baseload power in nuclear in France. And if France says, hey, we're going to get rid of nuclear, which they're talking about, they're not building new ones, that's going to be interesting.
So that's a really interesting point, that Europe is not monolithic, that there are a lot of different countries and perspectives. I will say that if you look at, Europe started turning away from, and I'm going to cast a wide net here. So, I'm just warning you now, but Europe started turning away in many ways from developing their own energy resources through oil and gas development. Around the same time that the U.S. started developing, the Shale Revolution kicked off in the early 2000s. And there's just a very clear line that as the U.S. started the Shale Revolution kicked off and we produced more oil and gas, prices went down, our energy security went up. And in Europe, their energy security goes down and their prices went way up. I do think France has made a lot of good decisions. You look at Germany, that is really doubling down primarily on renewables, starting to make some steps towards more natural gas, but is also increasing the amount of coal that they're burning because they need that baseload power. And their embrace of natural gas has been very tentative since post Russia. And I think that, first and foremost, a country needs to be realistic about their energy needs before you can talk about how are we going to improve the climate, right? Because if you're not providing energy through baseload power or through whatever sources you are, then you're not going to successfully reduce your emissions, right? And that's what you're seeing in Germany, is their emissions are going up because they're burning more coal.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. As I always kind of say, look, climate change is about lives in the future. If energy is expensive today or unreliable today, people die today.
Yeah.
So that we do have to look at it through that lens. I want to shift topics though, and I'll go first.
Okay.
I'll give you my take. You see what you think. So the SEC going to require you to publish your emissions. Everybody in energy initial thought was, oh my gosh, that's so horrible. I actually think it's going to be really good. Because once everybody is forced to publish their emissions, people are going to sit there and go, well, the oil and gas companies are creating the product, but they don't emit a whole lot. They've done a pretty good job of capturing methane and CO2 out in the field. They do that pretty well. It's all these Amazon vans running around. They're actually emitting. And the bigger problem is the person that gets 3 Amazon deliveries a day instead of one, as opposed to necessarily. I think it's going to
was that a personal attack?
No. It was not. I have no idea if you're Amazon.
I resemble that remark.
There you go. But so I think at the end of the day, there's a chance to maybe level set the discussion here of, look, hey, here's actually where the emissions are coming from, and let's have a more thoughtful discussion about it. Thoughts?
I think that's a really interesting perspective. I don't know
Pollyanna.
that no,
you can call me that.
I don't know that I would disagree with it. Most, especially in, I know in my industry, like most of our companies already disclose in some form or fashion, whether it's to the EPA or on their sustainability reports. So there's a good deal of disclosure already. And I do think, to your point, especially if they're moving away from the scope 3, disclosures, which we think they may be because they're inherently unreliable and difficult to calculate and beyond our control. You might see that. So I think that's a good point. I do think that a lot of the issues that we're focusing on in that climate disclosure bill would potentially bring some additional liability issues to oil and gas companies. And so you just want to make sure that those financial disclosures are not able to be weaponized, because we know that we're still going to remain a target of a lot of sort of anti-fossil fuel, either regulators or activists. So I do think there's still work to be done within the regulations regardless, but I think that's an interesting perspective. And certainly when you look at U.S. oil and gas producers vis-a-vis the rest of the world too. Not that they would necessarily get captured in the SEC regulations, but you do see that, to the extent that the world needs energy, you want to get it from U.S. producers, because we do have the most transparent and responsible production in the world.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right. I mean, I can't believe for a second that Venezuela, I've never been to a Venezuelan oil field, but I can't believe it is cleaner and nicer than a
Right.
U.S. oil field. Although one of the embarrassing moments of my career, because I was a finance guy, right? And I show up out at the rig, and that's always comedy time, right? We've got the money guy out here. What do we do? And my business partner, Mike Hines, great guy, is a man's man. I mean, he's the Marlboro man. I mean, he cuts off his arm, he'd probably just tape it back on and he'd be fine. He's that guy. He worked for Exxon for 13 years. He ran the J field for them, which is one of the nastiest, dirtiest fields out there, all this. So just a man's man. We are out there on my first time out in the field, we're out on a rig. And I don't even know what possessed me to say this, but I kind of went, it's really dirty out here. And Mike goes, please don't tell the company, man, you said that. You'll get your butt kicked, Chuck. And I'm like, okay, I got it. But
that's funny.
Yeah, no, we do it cleaner. And again, okay, so I'll take the next step. We're going to have to disclose this. My advice to the industry is, hey, we're going to have to disclose this anyway. Own the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Say, this is what it is. This is why it's important. Because I kind of equate that to ESG with my investors I used to go to, because, we were raising Energy Fund 6, and people would say, well, what's your ESG policy? And I'd go, what do you want it to be? Well, I don't know. And we always talk, I think it was Justice Potter, the famous Supreme Court decision about pornography. I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
It was kind of that way with ESG. Investors would say, I know it when I see it. The world right now has no idea what to make of all these emissions. They don't know what's good, bad. So go define it.
Yeah.
Be the first person to define it. Make the other side say, no, that's not right. I'd rather go first.
Yeah. And so I'll just put in a plug. So we developed our own reporting template so that companies can start disclosing emissions in a more in a more apples to apples fashion. Because we are very pro disclosure, and we want to make sure that investors are able to understand the emissions profile of our companies. And so we tried to bring a sort of more consistent approach to how all of this was being reported. And then that also has enabled us to kind of go back and show trends. And that I think gets the narrative point in part that you're suggesting, is that there's a very clear downward trend of the emissions profile of our companies, whether you look at the EPA data, you look at ESG data. U.S. companies are getting better and better and better year over year in terms of their overall emissions intensity of methane and GHG by almost every metric. And we're really proud of that. And ESG isn't just environmental, right? Like that's certainly what everybody seems to think it is, and that's how they all talk about it. But there's also, I think a lot of the companies that I work with, at least, have really embraced the whole ESG issue to some extent, because they're like, oh, you want to see my environmental performance? I'm happy to talk to you about that. I'm happy to talk to you about what I'm doing in the community. I'm happy to talk to you about my good governance practices. Like these are all things that our companies have been doing for decades, especially on the S and the G side, but haven't been characterizing it as ESG. And so in some ways, ESG is an opportunity to tell our story about what we're doing on emissions, about what we're doing in communities that we operate, and about the good governance practices that we bring to our companies.
I mean, literally, I think one of the biggest untold narratives on the planet is the generosity of the energy business. I mean, oil went to minus 37. Like literally you had to pay someone to take your barrel of oil. Now, granted, that was one day. But at the end of the day, I mean, industry is devastated. And I can't think of a major charity in Houston that went under.
Yeah.
I mean, people still cut checks and all. And the thing I hate, and I told this to a very prominent member of the Houston energy finance community, I said, hey, the environmentalists would not have as much sway in the world if people knew you existed. And as ugly as this sounds, the fact you won't come on my podcast and just talk about all the charitable endeavors you've done. Well, I don't want to toot my own horn. You're not.
Yeah.
You're defending the industry because everyone in the industry does that. So
it's a really humble industry, and I really love that about them. But you're right. There are a lot of great stories that not everybody knows because of it.
Yeah. So takes me to kind of something else I want to talk about. And again, I'll get on my soapbox. I'll throw it out there. You opine, critique, however. I think as an industry, we've totally buried our head in the sand. We don't tell our stories. When we pop our head up to actually tell our stories, we're a bunch of engineers, and we do it with facts and figures. And if you go look at the psychological studies out there, the three most effective ways to change somebody's mind are, number one, you just ask questions. That's why the Socratic method is really good. Two, you scare people. I think the environmentalists have done a good job of that. You scare them.
For sure.
Three, you make them laugh. Not you laugh, them laugh. The least effective way on all the psychological studies is facts and reasons and numbers. And in my whole career, I think I've seen two effective energy ads. One is there have been a couple of variations of it. I forget who did it originally, but most recently Energy Transfer did, hey, we're going on a first date, and the lipstick goes away because it's made out of petroleum products. And so slowly as this day is going along, everything that has petroleum in it goes away. I think that's actually pretty effective.
I don't think I've seen that ad.
You haven't seen it?
No, I should
so
try
energy,
to find it. I've seen a couple of their ads, but
maybe Energy Transfer Super Bowl commercial.
Okay.
Go Google it. And so I think that's actually pretty effective. It educates in kind of a funny way, connects on an emotional level. The second ad, I think, that incredibly effective. Now, it was an internal ad for the industry. Natural Gas Partners, the big private equity firm, they published an ad that says, we've created more millionaires than anyone else in the business. So if you're a management team, you're like, holy cow, I want to go with those guys. And, because it hit on kind of a base emotional level. And so I just think we've abdicated all sorts of responsibility for doing this. We don't tell our stories, and when we do, it's highly ineffective. Am I being too much the old man and grumpy?
I mean, I hear this a lot. I don't disagree with it. I think that there are a few, I guess I would ask a couple questions back. And these are questions that I struggle with too.
Yep.
Do we,
I don't have the answer.
Yeah, no, right.
So-
And neither do I. So what I focus on in my role is to impact policymakers, right? And, by extension, other people that impact policymakers, right? But we hear a lot about like changing hearts and minds, right? And like, I really struggle with the question of, do we need to be loved, right? Does this industry need to actually win over hearts and minds? Because what I know is that we are providing an essential service for America, for the world. And I know that when that essential product becomes scarce through, unreliability or increased costs or what have you, that then all of a sudden people really want and need our products. And so like, how important is that emotional connection, I guess, is the question that I struggle with.
Well, you bring up this point because the thing that might be the most effective thing we could do in the industry, not that it would make us loved, but maybe make us feared and the like, and give us some sway, is one day, 8:00 in the morning, email goes out, no petroleum products for 48 hours. Now, unfortunately, people would die in that scenario. It would be really bad.
Yeah.
But you grind the world to a halt, and okay, guys, you really don't want us around. I don't think that's the right answer, but you bring up that point. We at least ought to discuss it.
Yeah, and to me, when you get at like your three options, I do think that's, that is a facts and figures, right? It is educating people on like, hey, what is your life like if you don't have petroleum products in it? Like it's not good. You don't want to live that life, right? Yeah. And so there are probably, industry could probably do a better job of communicating that. But I also know that, at the end of the day, when people do understand it, one way or the other, if it's not available to them or if it becomes more scarce or becomes more expensive, they send a pretty clear message that like, no, we need energy and we want it affordable and we want it reliable. And beyond that, they don't think a lot about it. And it's kind of a luxury that we have in this country.
So another thing that I'll say, and I get flamed on Twitter for saying this, so sorry guys, I'm going to say it again. Generally speaking, in America, I think we celebrate success. Mm-hmm. I mean, we celebrate Steve Jobs. Bill Gates has gone crazy, so we don't celebrate him anymore. But generally speaking, we celebrate success. I think one of the issues that happened historically with energy is we're somewhat countercyclical. Mm-hmm. So high energy prices, we're doing really well. The rest of the world, United States is suffering. Right. I mean, it's just, that's how it's always. And unfortunately, I don't think we have displayed humility when we have been at that point. And it's unfortunate because we're almost the only the only industry that needs to do that, because tech is roaring, going great. Elon Musk can be as obnoxious as he wants because we're doing well, So Jeff Bezos can go buy his big, huge yacht because generally speaking, if he's doing well, the economy's doing well. I think that's part of the problem too.
For sure. I mean, you have, the president of the United States who will go on television and demagogue the price gouging that, right. Somehow companies that have no ability to set prices are engaging in, right? It's and absurd.
They have net income margins that are less than the average S&P 500 company.
Exactly. Yeah. And meanwhile, Apple and tech companies that do actually set their prices are making 10 times more, and everybody celebrates that as a great American success story. Yeah. It's really frustrating. And, if unfortunately energy is a very easy issue to demagogue. And, it's something that we have to deal with because every time prices go up, you hear it from, a lot of different corners, and it's a struggle.
One of the things we did at Digital Wildcatters when oil was kind of hitting its peak right at kind of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, so call it a year and a half ago, is we ran around with just our credit cards and we were buying people gas.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and we were recording it, and kind of our story was, and we meant it, was, hey, well, I was at minus 37 3 years ago. I got fired.
Yeah.
And so I understand the suffer. Oil's expensive now, so I'm doing a little better. I know it's making you suffer. Hey, we want to buy you some gas. And I mean, we actually, I think, connected with folks on an emotional level. We got a lot of good publicity from that, kind of virally, from shooting it out across social media, as well as just the people that we bought gas for. I mean, I got hugs, you know, and so
that was a really tough time. I mean, that was, gas was what, like, it was, at least in DC, it was close to $5 a gallon. Like, it was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it really was. And you realize that people, and kind of one of the things Dan Pickering, the big investor, was doing is he was monitoring when he would get gas, how many people stopped at $10, $15 versus 15.83, which meant they filled up their tank.
Yeah.
And it was dramatic.
Yeah.
Kind of over a 3-month period, you know, it was dramatic. And so
a lot of my companies also made very generous contributions to Ukraine aid efforts too. Cause, you know, I think they, you know, as, you know, they were being accused of, you know, war profiteering or what have you, they kind of wanted to put forward this really important effort to sort of also show solidarity with the people of Ukraine. And I think, you know, collectively they donated tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars to that effort. So it is, to your point, it's a very generous industry and very resilient when prices go to negative 37.
Exactly. So let's close on this.
Okay.
I am going to make you energy czar, not of the world, but of the United States. So whatever you say goes. You can rule with an iron fist if you want to. However you're looking at it, what are we doing in Anne's world?
That is a great question. Okay, I'll try not to get too soapboxy here, but
soapbox away and read me the 172 edicts you're doing on the first day.
I don't have that many. I might. If you give me a little time. So first I'll say that I think one of the big frustrations from where I sit is the lack of any sort of thoughtful energy policy in this country, right? I mean, even within this administration, you have totally conflicting goals, right? Like they clearly want to, force a shift away from fossil fuels, but they also want to keep energy really affordable and reliable at the same time, right? And these goals are in conflict with each other fundamentally. So, I think first and foremost, let's craft a thoughtful energy policy on how does the U.S. view energy in the U.S. and including in particular domestic energy production, right? Like, what do we want our role to be in the world? So I think if you went through that exercise, then you would hopefully come to the conclusion that we want abundant, affordable, and clean energy, right? Like the most abundant possible, the most affordable possible, and the cleanest possible, because we want to lead the world in the cleanest molecules produced. And so if that was the goal, and I would hope that was the goal, I don't think you need to do a lot to achieve that, frankly. I mean, if you look at the Shale Revolution of the early 2000s, most of that happened because, hydraulic fracturing was regulated by the states, and the federal government kind of took a light touch approach to that. And states were able to regulate it in a really thoughtful and like regionally appropriate way. So if those are the goals, affordable, reliable, clean energy, I think the first thing you have to do is kind of pull back on some of the regulatory issues that you're seeing today. And there is absolutely an appropriate place for regulation, but it should be done in sort of a collaborative and rational approach with the industry. So rational regulation, first and foremost.
That was the thing that got me is when we would talk about the Shale Revolution and fracking, I'm not talking politics here, but arguably you could say George Bush was our most conservative president, right? And that's really where the Shale Revolution started.
Mm-hmm.
And Bush, true to kind of his core principles, states ought to do it,
Yeah.
not the EPA. Then you had arguably, except maybe till now, but arguably you had our most liberal president, Obama. At that point, the U.S. energy business was jobs, union jobs, etc. They took the same approach.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, sure, the EPA did a little bit more under Obama than it did at Bush, but their energy policies were basically the same. It wasn't until we became a smaller piece of the S&P 500, less important and the like, that you really saw the ramp up in the EPA.
I think that's a really important point. Now, I will say, I actually wasn't representing this industry during the Obama administration. I was on the Hill during the Obama administration. And it didn't feel particularly friendly at the time.
Right.
But if you look back rhetorically, he would talk in the State of the Union about how great U.S. natural gas is and how, the production and utilization and export of natural gas, what a great thing it was going to be for America and the world. Can you imagine this president saying that? Like you can't even get your head around it. We were digging around in some old Obama archives like last year when prices were really high, and when gas prices were high during the Obama administration, they put out this whole thing on how they're doing all of these great things to maximize production on federal land, to increase production. And like, you just can't fathom that happening under this president, right? So it didn't feel friendly for the industry.
Right.
But if you look at it, you are 100% right that the Obama administration, especially in terms of how they viewed natural gas, really still allowed industry to kind of flourish. And then you look at this administration and like there's been almost a complete halt to federal leasing, increase in royalty rates. I mean, more regulation than anyone in the industry that I've worked with has ever seen in a short amount of time, and more aggressive.
Yeah, and the thing to me is it's dishonest. Well, you have the permits to go drill, but I can't lay a pipeline to get the gas out, and you're not going to let me flare.
Right.
Okay,
exactly.
Great. Yeah. Got me.
And and I have to wait a year to get permits sometimes. And if I go over to Texas, I can get it in 6 days. So
the one thing the Obama administration did, and like I hate the fact that they did this, but I'm actually kind of impressed. Supposedly, permitting processes went from digital to manual. So historically, under George Bush and the beginning of the Obama administration, you would file electronically for your permits and all. And they changed it to no, you have to send paper copies of the permits for us to do. And those were able to get lost on desk. Well, we don't know it. Yeah. And so I've heard that story. I believe it to be true, but that was a neat little way of, we're going to slow this down and no one's going to know why.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's interesting because just about 6 months ago, BLM revised the number of unused permits. If you remember, the Biden administration kept being like, the industry is sitting on 9,000 APDs. And then very quietly, they were like, actually, it's like 5,000 or 6,000.
Right.
And it wasn't because they started drilling all of a sudden, they just miscalculated. So whatever that system is, it is fairly antiquated.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll just note that I think is always important to remember is it was under the Obama administration that we lifted the oil export ban. Which was probably the most significant energy policy development in like the last 2 decades, right? I mean, it was, other than maybe the Bush administration, allowing states to regulate fracking. So that was a really big deal. I was actually working for Speaker Boehner and Speaker Ryan at the time, and so got to kind of help get that across the finish line, which was really fun. But that was, a negotiation with the Obama administration. They got some, renewable tax credits for it in exchange. But, again, they at least brought an element of, rationality to their energy policy that, is is sometimes missing today. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go. Now I'm Energy Czar.
Okay.
I am going to command each and every energy company in the United States to give variable pricing of whatever it is, gasoline, electricity, based on regulations they want passed. So, Chuck, you can pay, $2 for gasoline if Congress will pass these three things. Unfortunately, you're paying $3 today. If they pass this, I'm going to have to charge you $4. And I think, one, we should be doing that because it educates. Two, I think you might even be able to, it's kind of like that, hey, will you pay more for electricity if it comes from renewable? We ought to start bifurcating the pay. If you truly believe that methane emissions should be zero on all this, gas stations ought to sell zero emission methane gasoline, and you're going to pay $8. And so I think they ought to be using price to educate. And I've never seen that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how that works.
Well, I came up with it after a bottle of wine, so it worked really well then.
It's an interesting idea. If these are commodities, right? Because I only represent upstream too.
Right.
Like, I don't know how to do that, but it's interesting. But I will say, I mean, the only sort of version of that I'm aware of is with the certified gas, market. But there just aren't a lot of, I think at the end of the day, I don't know how many people are willing to pay more for lower emissions products.
And that would potentially be the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so maybe it's less the stick of higher prices, pay it, because we know most people aren't going to do it. Maybe it's just the carrot of, if you will call your congressman and ask for these three things, we could lower it 82 cents a gallon or something. Because you touch the general population literally millions of times a day. Yeah. Everybody fills up their car. Everybody pays their electric bill. You have this communication. Just lay it out for people. Anyway.
Right. And I think one of the things that's so impactful about gas prices, just sort of as a side note, is that like it's on every corner, right? Right. It's like more prominent than the price of milk, because even if you're not buying it, you know what it is.
Yeah. Sign this petition and we'll knock 5 cents off. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a powerful way that you could use that, and I think we're just too scared to do it.
Yeah, it's complicated, but it's a good thought. I do think I totally agree that price is the most impactful message that we have, and it is something that we know that politicians are most afraid of too. Yeah.
And I said there were 2 great ads in energy. The Biden stickers saying "I did this," that was actually pretty effective too, I think.
That was quite amusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do folks reach you? What kind of folks do you want reaching you? What do you need help with?
Yeah. So our website is AXPC.org. So feel free to check us out there. But we do have a grassroots center where you can sort of sign up and get Washington updates or interesting facts and figures from us that we try to push out to kind of to educate people in our network and have them help advocate for us. And then you'd also get an alert if Washington is doing something impactful that, would be helpful to hear from constituents on to help you write your congressman. So go to our website. It's super easy to sign up for that and to get those updates. We also have, we're also on Twitter and Instagram and, both to kind of keep folks informed, but also to highlight a lot of the great things our companies are doing. We like to do that too. So.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. It was a pleasure. This was fun.
Cool.